Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney. Today's review, we're going to be looking at cookies. On my channel, we look at all the public-facing privacy documentation or documentation that applies to the processing of personal data. And we don't just look at the privacy notice. Yes, they're very important, but there's many ways that companies process personal data. And at my firm, we review all of the ways in which an organization can maintain and create a privacy program that is compliant. Now, when we look at privacy legislation, if you look at the definitions in a lot of privacy legislation, it doesn't just cover the traditional personal data identifiers that we think of, like name and email address. The definitions are broad enough to capture information that could be linked back to an individual, which cookies do that, which is why cookies meet the definition of personal data and which is why I'm reviewing them on my channel. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on the preference center. If you want an in-depth review of my take on different preference centers, take a look at other cookie reviews that I've done. I think it's valuable to look at this one today. I'll tell you why. The preferences for this organization, right? The first thing I want to say is I just opened all of the cookies that are not essential for the site to function, and they've got no cookies to display. So this means one of two things to me. It may be that this site actually only processes necessary cookies. It may be that there are no functional analytics, so I presume that the cookie review is going to be very short because it doesn't seem like there's any, not even those being used for advertising. Now, this is really, really important, and I'm glad I clicked the preference center because I was just about to click away from it and we'll review the cookie policy. But this is a really important factor, and when I have lots of different intake forms that I distribute to clients. But the reason why this is so important and why I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about it is if your site is only collecting necessary cookies, the first thing is that you may not need to distribute or have a preference center to allow individuals to exercise their choices. Now, I say that very lightly and carefully because geography is unknown at this point, but there's one of two things going on. Either they're not listing the cookies because we can see them somewhere else, or these cookies are not being collected and the only ones relevant to the site are those that are necessary. And this does happen, which is why privacy is so company to company specific. You cannot implement the same types of compliance obligations that another company has if they don't apply to your own organization. Now, I can't say that for a fact. There's lots of details missing here, but I still think it's valuable to look at this because I'm still going to select reject all because we don't know for a fact that there are no analytical cookies just because there are none displayed in the preference center. That's what this is. So I don't know that this is for a fact, but I do think it's interesting that there's none to display because it is possible that the only ones that are being used for the site are those that are necessary. Now, this also has no cookies to display. So I guess my question is, maybe they're just not displaying the cookies here. These preference centers often look very different company to company. Generally, companies will list the cookies associated with the category. So they'll list the functional cookies, but there's not even any displayed for necessary to. So I wonder why that is the case. I also wonder where the products and services are being distributed for this company for them not to list the cookies, and maybe the cookies are actually listed in the policy itself. So I didn't have the opportunity to save any type of preference because there is no button, right? Do you see that? There's no button to exercise my options. So I'm actually going to select reject all, and let's get into the policy and see what we can see. How do we use cookies? We use first and third party cookies for several reasons. Okay, so they got the cookies. They have one strictly necessary cookie. Okay, let me slow down. We use first and third party cookies for certain reasons, several reasons. Some cookies are required for technical reasons in order to operate the site, in order for our websites to operate, and we refer to these as essential, strictly necessary. So I talked about this when we looked at the preference center. Other cookies also enable us to track and target the interests of our users to enhance the experience on our online properties. Third parties serve cookies through our websites. Okay. This is described in more detail below. Let's take a look. How can I control the cookies? Let's talk about this. You have the right to decide whether to accept or reject cookies. You can exercise your cookie rights by setting your preferences in the Cookie Consent Manager. So the Cookie Consent Manager is basically what we were just looking at before this, right? That's what this is. If you choose to reject, okay, the Cookie Consent Manager allows you to select which categories of cookies you accept or reject. Let's talk about this, right? Because when I clicked on this below, the Cookie Consent Manager allows you to select which categories of cookies you can accept or reject. When I clicked on this, I'm not sure I do have the opportunity to reject functional cookies. Because we know that this one is always active, but there's actually no button that allows me to save this preference. What if, for example, I wanted analytic cookies but not functional? I don't have the opportunity to do that. I only have the opportunity to accept all, reject all, which is rejecting all of these. And I'm intrigued about what save my preferences would mean. So I think that there's a bit of work that needs to be done on the preference center, because I'm not clear on how it works. And I think a lot about, if I'm not clear on how the process works, I wonder what a consumer of the products by this company are thinking too. So it needs to be very clear and easy to do. If I reject all, I can believe that I'm rejecting every single one. But what about if I'm okay with the organization collecting performance cookies? How do I save my preference and accept this one, but reject analytic and functional? That's not clear to me. Okay, let's go back. Essential cookies cannot be rejected as they are strictly necessary. That's okay. The Cookie Consent Manager can be found in the notification banner and on the website. Okay. If you choose to reject the cookies, you may still use our site, though your access to some functionality in areas of our website may be restricted. You may also set or amend your web browser control. Okay, I'm going to go down. Do you serve targeted advertising? Third parties may serve cookies on your computer or mobile device to serve advertising through our websites. These companies may use the information about your visits to this and other websites in order to provide, let me tell you my opinion based on looking at the verbiage. I think that there are updates that need to be made to the preference center so that I can actually exercise a preference cookie to cookie. I also think that a lot of the language, to me, not as specific as I might want if I was a consumer trying to understand cookie usage. There appears to be insight into the fact that first and third party cookies are used. And we don't know what those are, and they're not visible on the preference center. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there's also discussion about targeted advertising. I think it would be interesting to find out how exactly this is being done. They're saying it can be accomplished through cookies, but where's the list of cookies if this is applicable? And how do we opt out of that if we're website consumers because we don't want to be targeted? I think that's really important. There's something else that just caught my eye before we finish this review. The date at the top of this cookie policy indicates when it was last updated. So I'm just going to go to the top, but there is no date. Now, why is that valuable? And this is the last thing I'll say. It's valuable because the legislation that could apply to an organization is constantly changing, constantly changing. So what that means is if the legislation has changed, what you're doing as an organization may be impacted, and it's your responsibility to review that. In addition to that, the manner in which a website operates changes, right? I have changed my own personal website many, many times. Okay, I make tweaks to it. If I could give you a period in which I make tweaks to my own personal website, probably at least once every month, something is changing. I'm changing something because things are changing within the business, right? And I want to give a better user experience. So if I'm doing that personally, I believe that other organizations are also doing that, larger organizations, right? How our websites as organizations change could influence the types of processing of personal data that we conduct, which is why it's so important to update this policy as and when those changes are made, right? So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments or questions about what I've stated, leave them below and I will see you in another review.